fear wells up. Your heart starts pumping. And as it comes closer, you start feeling instincts you've never felt before. As it spins and passes, you move into the zone. You're truly in the moment. It's a fucking shark. This is what I do. I take people into the zone. My name's Elliott, and I'm a shark biologist specialized in shark behavior. Why do I do this? And how is it important? Well, put simply, it's because this is how the majority of us get our information about the natural world. You're probably already holding on to your phone. That's how addicted we are to it, and we've heard a lot about it at this stage, but it is your main source of information in this world. Unfortunately, it absorbs the majority of your time. Think of how much time you spend on that phone gathering information about this world. Now contrast that to how much time you spend in the mountains, in the oceans, in the forests, in the real environment. It's called fucking nature, people. And unfortunately, we are seriously, emotionally disengaged with it. Now, the problem is with more and more people on this planet, there is less and less space. And we are actively outcompeting not only the environment, but the species that live in those environments for its resources. And nature's losing. And what's even sadder is that science is measuring it. So how is this allowed to happen? It's because of that lack of emotional engagement with our environment, with nature. You can't care about something unless you know what it is, know what it does. And you're not going to conserve something unless you place a value on it and care for it. A scientific understanding is what enables this process. But my question is science being communicated to us as the public? My opinion is no, it's not. Why? Because it's not coming through the portals that we use every single day to get it. It's not coming through the modern media. And the reason it's not is because conventional scientific communication is through boring-ass peer-reviewed journals that only people within the same specialty read, and the public sure as hell doesn't. Why this is relevant is because today, and I'm sure you can agree, we acknowledge there's a blatant disregard for scientific insight in our political circles and especially in our corporate circles. And if you don't fully agree with that, this one image totally gives the example that we can all relate to as to how politicians, corporations don't really give a shit about science. They're after the short-term fix, the shareholder profit above and beyond the public benefit. So how do we stop ourselves all walking blindly through naivety because of a lack of sustenance of scientific information? How do we stop ourselves falling off this cliff? What we need to do is ensure scientific information is paired with how we receive it. We need science and modern media to be coupled. We need to show scientists that conventional communication can work in modern media, that subjectivity and bias can be controlled. At the end of the day, when you post on Instagram, you post it, so you control it. We need to make this available to the public because otherwise you are disempowered to have a voice of reason. Why does it matter? Because if we want to survive, we need to sustain the resources that we require to survive. And the planet is calling for it. Action is happening. And it is happening through this informed public opinion. It is especially happening with the more media-savvy generation. And we are seeing positives through this factual, justified, empowered public opinion that en masse can actually take on, ironically, the people we employ, the politicians and the corporations. And I've seen a similar example with a subject I study. This subject is likely the biggest fear of people when they have never even been near it. It is the subject that media has portrayed so poorly and non-factually. It is the subject, of course, called the shark. And the shark is my scientific specialty, but what I'm here for today is to enlighten you to the pin-up boy this animal has become for a recipe I truly value and perceive to be important in communicating science to the public. The recipe works by using stimulating visual imagery in modern media to capture an audience, and we lace science into it. That pairs up the science and the modern media in order to give it to the public. This recipe works, and I'm going to prove it to you through my personal life story. I'm fucking scared of sharks. Why wouldn't you be? It's a gnarly predator, highly evolved, with a whole bunch of teeth that eat shit. I mean, you'd be stupid not to. What's important is to realize why you are afraid of it, and of more importance, how we react to that fear. For me, my fear is reacted through respect rather than malice, hatred. And it's based on a factual understanding of this animal, not the myth. As a child, I was a nature kid. I'm pretty sure we all were, and I'm pretty sure every kid at some stage wants to be a Jacques Cousteau, a marine biologist, an explorer, an understander of the natural world. I've been lucky enough to pursue that through 15 years of university, through my undergrad, through my high school, through my entire life. And the reason for it is because it ticked a lot of boxes. It was my passion, and it paired very closely with another passion of mine, which was surfing. And I think we can see where this is kind of going. As a surfer, if you are a surfer, you know exactly what I want to talk about. But if you're not, imagine you're sitting on your little foam surfboard, literally immersed in nature. You can't see what's below you, but you know those things are out there. And the only form of education most of the people in this room have had of those animals below you is, of course, this. And you cannot help but think you are that swimmer when you're sitting on your surfboard. My mind wanted to presume that event was going to happen. But instead of obviously basing my perception on a non-factual movie, I wanted to know the truth. It was ingrained in me through science, the scientific process, but also just growing up as a kid to go to the source, to figure out the truth. Don't rely on being given things. So I went to the source. I went to South Africa. And I faced my fear. I faced it in the flesh. And to be frank, it looks exactly the fucking same as Jaws. And it scared the crap out of me. And to be frank, I stopped surfing for a couple of days. But then, in what was clearly stimulating visual imagery, I was exposed to scientific fact. I was working with researchers who peeled back the layers of myth, showed me, yes, sharks look like this in particular situations when they're hunting, but the majority of the time they're highly evolved, cautious, risk-mitigating animals. And for me, that started to change my perception. And what I started to realize is this was incredibly powerful. I started learning what the shark was, how valuable the shark is to the ocean and therefore us. And furthermore, when I got to know them more, I learned to speak their language, body language. It allowed me to swim with the shark. And people became fascinated by this. How can man and shark coexist in one picture frame without it turning into Jaws? Now, not everyone wants to or can go swimming with sharks, but I'm yet to meet a person who isn't fascinated by the imagery of it. And I learned that it was very easy to lace science into this imagery. When I talk about lacing science, I talk about what David Attenborough does so well. You enjoy the imagery. You don't even realize you're digesting the knowledge. And this is a recipe I learned works really well in modern media. Of course, modern media is all about catching your eye, instant gratification. You read the caption, you push like, and you move on. A shark is a very eye-grabbing thing. Some knowledge is empowering to yourself and slightly pivots your perception. This recipe I've seen change literally millions of people's perceptions about the shark. And it's helped us to value the shark, to empathize with the shark. And let's remember, this is likely the most feared thing for most people in this world. If you're not convinced yet that this would work for you, let me tell you some stories about how it has for those millions of people. Shark finning. If you don't know what this is, to put it bluntly, every year for the past 30 or so years, over 100 million sharks are killed for their fins for a bowl of soup. This has resulted in declines of 90% of the world's sharks. The shark has been around longer than any animal on Earth. And in my lifetime, we've nearly wiped them out. Why has this been allowed? Because conventional scientific publication is just too slow to keep up with the modern day impacts we cause. And secondly, because no one gave a shit about sharks. If you don't like something, you're not going to care that it's not there. So this became the backbone to my PhD. I saw I had to create empathy with the public, with the people who have the ability to make change. And to do this, I needed to create imagery that was appealing to them, show some emotion between man and shark, lace this with science to increase the value in how we perceive this animal, and ultimately help change public perception. By taking people like news anchors out to sea, by taking media personalities out on the water with me, I was able to give them the scientific understanding I had. That peeled back the layers of myth. Then by taking them into the water, facing the animal on its terms, and realizing it doesn't hunt you down and eat you, they were able to empathize with this animal, realize the unjust that they had been putting on it, and that society had been putting on it. And of most importance, by doing this, the public watching these media forums also went through this process. An educated and thus empowered public opinion grew. It was justified and it was factually supported. We forget that we employ the corporations. We buy their shit. We give them the empowerment. So when the public decides, no, Air New Zealand, we're not going to fly with you because you ship shark fins, these companies turn very quickly, and they did. And when they did, so too did the government. With so much scientifically justified public opinion, they had to. Again, we employ the governments. And when this happened, in what was only a few years, shark finning was banned in New Zealand, and it rolled out across the world before New Zealand and after. And now in most countries around the world, this practice is banned, it's blasphemized, it's not even supported in its own heritage country of China. Sharks aren't just killed for their fins. They're killed for fear. These images come from Western Australia in 2014, where a shark cull was instigated. There was 5 shark attacks in 3 years. And as we know with negative comments on your social media, you only need a few people who are really loud to seemingly make an opinion. And politicians love that shit. They jump up and they knee-jerkily react and create a policy based on nothing but what they think the people want. Unfortunately, like I said, the loudest voices are often the least educated. And in this situation, the government decided we're going to go out, put a whole bunch of baited hooks in the water, and just kill all the sharks. Now, fear is real sometimes, and we should not ignore it, but I emphasized before we should not react with malice. We should react with respect and knowledge and, make logical decisions, not irrational ones. But I get it, you might not like sharks, and just like the boogeyman, you might just want it to go away. So I'll give you an example that might be a little bit more obvious to relate to. Let's imagine Wimbledon, the tennis competition. They decided this year that they wanted to play it in the African savannas. Already you're thinking, well, that's not a fucking good idea. So then Roger Federer and Nadal and a few of these guys start getting taken by lions. And the Wimbledon guys go, hey, look, guys, we can't obviously lose those kind of players, so well, we're just going to go out and kill all the lions. I don't think anyone in this room would agree that that is something that should be done in such a circumstance. But unfortunately, that's literally the exact same thing that this government did. They went out to kill sharks in their own backyard for doing things that sharks do at statistical rates that kill less people than probably this microphone and clicker does. What was amazing was the logical and empathetic public opinion that came up against this. The unfortunate thing about politicians is when they make a decision, they don't go, oh shit, sorry man, that was wrong, you guys are right. They put their heels in the ground and they try and justify it with bullshit and non-answers. The way you beat that is through factual conversation, through a justified, scientifically credible argument, because you simply cannot argue with fact. But in order to do this, science needs to give that fact to the public. And how best reach the public? Well, this is where our recipe came in. Stimulating visual imagery laced with science in modern media to communicate that science to the public. And this is what we did. Any shark that was over 3 meters long, they'd pull up and they'd shoot it. Any shark under that, they release alive. But you can see a shark that's on a hook 2 feet long for 12 hours, ends up exhausted, dumped to the bottom, can't swim and therefore can't breathe and will die. We saw this negligence happening day in, day out, and we saw it as an opportunity to show the negligence, the neglect, the lack of understanding about this animal, which was entirely innocent. It was, in fact, great white sharks in this situation that had caused attacks, not tiger sharks. So what we decided to do was not only a moral, reasonable thing for an innocent animal, but we wanted to create some stimulating imagery. And what better way than to help a vulnerable, innocent, left for dead being. So we picked up this shark off the bottom, my friend Ocean Ramsey and myself, and we swam it. And we swam it much like when you catch a trout or a game fish, you hold it into the current to let it get its breath back. What you're trying to do is get oxygen through its blood to get rid of stress hormones. And this shark was so exhausted, it couldn't even breathe for itself. We had to touch its nose, open its mouth, swim with it. And through time, even the fisheries guys were blown away as to what was happening. And through time, word got out and we were surrounded by a bunch of vessels. And through time, there was news helicopters over us, media on boats. And after an hour and a half of doing this, a story was being created. And empathy was being created. I had never been this close to a tiger shark. I was 30 centimeters away from its eye, seeing its tail not kick, acting entirely lifeless, and it had done nothing wrong. Through political will, this animal, look at its mortal wound through its head, was left for dead. And reluctantly, after an hour and a half with no signs of life, we needed to just let it try and swim on its own. And like my heart, the shark just sank like a stone towards the bottom. But then its fin hit the bottom and it gave a kick. And then it gave another kick. And then it started swimming like a shark should. And then it started swimming so fast that we could not keep up with it. And after an hour and a half of applying some factual, biological understanding, some empathy, some will to support something through knowledge, the shark swam off and continued to do what sharks should do. The point of that story, I imagine you just engaged empathetically with that innocent poor animal, is that's also what the media did. You put a shark on the front page of the paper, it sells. You put a story of Cinderella kind of like that, and it sells like hell. And this went viral. And more importantly, I didn't do that to get in the media for myself. I did it so I could say this was neglect. Scientifically, culls don't work to improve beach safety. There are alternatives that are proven to work. And in doing so, we empowered the public opinion with fact. And a week later, that cull was stopped and alternatives were implemented. That's one more example of using this recipe. There's many other platforms that we have in modern media, like those of the National Geographics, where I put purely factual content in there to show the Jane Goodallness of sharks, that sharks have personalities. And just like us, that's based on how we have grown up, what we've experienced, what fishermen gave them shit when it was caught on a hook, or how they fight each other. Sharks have feelings. These are facts, and these enable empathy. I've done Shark Week shows, and if you know anything about Shark Week, it is likely the largest dramatized concept of a shark show in the world. It got so bad that scientists stopped working on the shows because credibility was thrown out the window. But when 27 million people a year watch it, and it's the largest platform for shark education in the world, as a scientist who studies that, it should be your responsibility to communicate your fact to the forums with the most eyes. And Shark Week has responded with much better factual content. Now, many scientists avoid the media. They think you cannot control subjectivity and bias. It's a cop-out. I feel it's a cop-out for insecurity of a conventional scientist who's been stuck in an office too long. We can teach anyone skills, and learning to control media is not a difficult one, especially when these days you control your own output. Why does this matter? Because to put it simply, I hope I've outlined a recipe of empowering public through this communication of fact. If we can make people value a shark, protect a shark, we empower people, and knowledge is so empowering that this is literally Jaws being rescued on the very beach where Jaws the movie was created. If that is not a modern day change of perception for sharks, I don't know what is. And it shows that we are able to care about even the most scariest thing. Now, I've told you guys this recipe. I told my university one day, and you can imagine the stonewall I came up against conventional communication. And a colleague of mine, why I have this picture here, is because he stood up and he said, yeah, cool, Riley, you study sharks. I study fucking plankton. Like, how am I supposed to make that so entertaining that news stories are going to capture it and there's going to be helicopters flying over the top and I'm going to get to do what you do? Your recipe is flawed, he said. And I said, have you ever made the effort to create stimulating visual imagery to communicate the importance of phytoplankton? He said, no. I said, well, look at what David Attenborough and Netflix just did. Phytoplankton. As numerous as all the trees on Earth. They give us half the oxygen we breathe. But they also assist in cloud formation, generating fresh water for all of us to survive on, but also they block out shortwave radiation from the sun, curbing impacts of climate change. Yet, the ice sheets that form their home are melting, and the animals that provide them their food are at risk. Yet we continue to fin sharks, we continue to catch whales and net dolphins. The food chain that creates a third of the world's food, the ecosystems that create our climate, the water that we breathe, all can be traced from one corner of the earth to the other, from the largest animals to the smallest. That's pretty fucking stimulating for phytoplankton, I would have thought. And if you can do that with that and you're not stimulated, then I don't know what sharks are going to do for you. Now, the point is, animals are very resilient, so are ecosystems, but we are changing these habitats quicker than what they can adapt to. If we do not show the public the value of these animals and these ecosystems, how can we expect to protect them? To create value of something you don't understand, you need scientific information. If we do not, as the scientific community, put that in the forums the public use, ultimately, we're all going to fucking walk blindly off the cliff. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I get it. When you were explaining to me about how you use social media to create empathy for sharks, I was trying to imagine how you might possibly do that, and now seeing that, I'll admit I was sitting there and I'm like, oh, the poor shark. I was sharing with Riley before that I saw Jaws as a child, so I still have that image in my head, but now you've replaced it with something else. So
oh, that's good.
I think I'm going to be looking at the ocean very differently. So we do want to open it to questions because we have a few minutes, and I can imagine, like, we've got a room full of people. Everybody has a shark question, and I see a hand up already. So if we can get a microphone over there, that would be great.
Hello, thanks for the amazing talk. I really enjoyed it. So I have actually two questions. Have you not seen a species of shark that you would have liked to swim with? And the second thing is, how deep can sharks actually swim underwater? And yeah, so that would be my two questions.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a very sad question because what Jacques Cousteau, the Sylvia Earles, the ocean legends of back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I'm talking 30 or 40 years ago only, they described the oceanic whitetip as the most numerous shark in the world, and it was. It was in every ocean in the world, and now there's 1% of them left. So that's a shark I've never swum with. It's probably the only species of big shark I've never swum with, and that shows the effect we've had on them. How deep sharks go? Well, it totally depends on the species, but the blue shark I study, one of my tags on those animals went to 2,000 meters deep. So these animals have an incredible ecological role from the bottom of the oceans to the poles to the equators. Thank you.
So out of all the questions I could have imagined in the world, I can tell you I did not imagine this one. Can you give us some examples of some body language to use with a shark?
Yeah, this is cool. I do this with school kids that I speak to a lot, and it's pretty easy to communicate. I say to them, if someone came up to you in the playground like this, like, what is that person saying to you? And it's pretty freaking obvious. And sharks do the exact same body language, literally we do. A shark will parallel swim with you to measure up the size. That's us in the bar as boys doing this with each other, chest to chest. They'll get the eyes going like this, being like, I can see you. They'll get their teeth out going, I've got these tools, and I'll use them, but don't make me. And one of the nicest ones that they do is they just go like this with their fins. And you see these in different levels.
Yep.
When you swim with the sharks, and it depends on the species, and it depends on what food's in the area and how big they are versus you. But what you learn is if you give it back, and you don't back down like I hope some kids learn to do with bullies, yeah, you might get a smack, but generally from a shark, it's just a bump. It's not a bite. And then everyone's on the same level, respect is established, and coexistence can happen. So it's quite simple, actually.
Very cool. We do have a question from the back. Oh, I think that's Neil.
Hey, Riley. Well done. Riley, the question I have for you, what is the impact of the shark tourism industry in the cage diving, the shark cage diving?
Yeah, classic South African question. But what's great about in South Africa where cage diving was born is science addressed that question because people perceived cage diving to be teasing and feeding sharks and associating food with people. The good thing about science is we don't have opinions based on emotion or subjectivity. And science showed that if operated correctly and food was limited, the sharks actually, and it makes sense, through not getting food and expending energy, negatively associated with cage diving boats. And if any positive association was seen through overfeeding, it was only localized at the boats where it happened and the site, which happens where they hunt the seals anyway. And I learned this in South Africa, and it was kind of one thing that scared the shit out of me, but the sharks hunt the seals, then they come and they sit right underneath us as surfers in the waves to digest their seals because the waves do the breathing for them. Then they go back and hunt after that at Seal Island. So they're very incredibly smart, and if they weren't, they'd be munching us left, right, and center.
So I had to laugh at one of these questions because earlier on, for anybody who was here at the beginning of the talk, I think all of the men were seeing Andrew speak because from Pornhub, and all of the single ladies were here, so everybody wants to know if you're single. Brilliant.
I'm not going to answer that. That's a bit intrusive, but yeah.
You don't have to. I was just joking.
But I do see some of these questions,
I
and
know, I'm
yeah.
like, yes. I saw the one pop a shark, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell you
Did you
that.
take the photos yourself? The amazing thing about stimulating visual imagery is you're only as good as your photographer. And you generally see a lot of people who work in this industry have very close relationships with the people who enable their imagery, because I've recently not had my photographer, and I haven't done an Instagram post in like 3 weeks because of it, because you realize how valuable that imagery is.
Amazing. We've got time for one more question if anybody in the audience has one. Really? Nobody else has a shark question?
Yell it out, yeah.
I was going to say, well, you're getting that. I do have a personal question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the last time you were here was when you were 18 years old and you were looking forward to coming back to Europe. So how's this experience been for you?
I think what's amazing is that evidently shark in this spectrum of when you read through the thing seemed kind of weird. But what I've seen is everyone that's spoken here seems to have a very similar intertwined message. It's a message of a lack of empathy for each other or the world, and it's because of a disconnection because of technology, which is also empowering, and as one of my colleagues said, stops us dying of like diseases and whatnot. But I think we're all realizing that there's a little bit of an imbalance, and we're trying to bring it back to where we value the ecosystems that actually enable us to survive. And that's come across from astrophysicists to guys who sail around the world to myself. So.
It's pretty amazing. Okay, our last question.
Hi. So yeah, for a lot of people, shark fishing is their only way of making an income and feeding their families. So are there programs for substituting that to give them chances?
Yeah, excellent question. I and other shark conservationists have realized you need to work with shark fishermen. Most fishermen don't want to kill sharks, and especially in the developing countries, they've been around long enough to know that sharks maintain a healthy ecosystem. What efforts are trying to do is, number one, curb out the black market purchase of shark fins, where people come in and supply them and take away other opportunities they have and just give them shark fishing materials. But what is a better one, and it comes back to Neil's kind of question, is one shark killed is worth $100. One shark in ecotourism is worth $1 million a year. So a live shark is worth more than a dead shark. So converting shark fishermen to shark ecotourist operators is sustainable and more profitable. And ultimately gives respect to the shark, and I hope you guys have all learned that too, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Riley. Amazing.
Cheers.
Woo, big round of applause for Riley Elliott.